Okay, thank you for joining us tonight for Flood Risk Public Open House meeting for Missoula County in the city of Missoula. This is a live stream event and will be recorded for everyone's awareness. And in the meantime, once the presentation begins, I'll be dropping project website in the chat, as you probably might have reviewed already, and also contact for the floodplain administrators who you can contact. And after the presentation, we'll also have Nadine on the call, who is with us right now, to answer any questions you might have.
Good evening, folks.
Thank you for joining us.
My name is David Ramper. I work as a planner for the city of Missoula. And I'm here tonight with representatives from the Montana Department of Transportation, Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, with Allied Engineering, Morrison, Maryland, and Missoula County. And we're here to present to you information on a draft floodplain study that's been conducted and is moving through a multi-stage process. And so we'd like to provide you with some information and also on the process in general, on the project in general, steps in the process, and then also help answer questions about particular properties that you might have. And so now I'd like to pass the mic to Tiffany Leiden, Public Outreach Specialist with the DNRC.
Thanks, Dave. All right, well, welcome everybody. If I can get this going here. Let's see, is that working? Did it change? No. Okay, there. All right. Yeah, as Dave said, well, first, hello and welcome. My name is Tiffany Leiden. I'm an outreach specialist with the Montana Department of Natural Resources, also shortened as DNRC, so you hear that tonight. We've got a number of people here in the room tonight, and we do have a couple of folks that have joined online via Zoom, so I'm going to try to kind of do double duty here tonight, so everybody can get some of the same information. I know some of you have gotten a chance to look at the draft maps with at the different stations we've got set up around the room or done some of that at home. We do have a lot of folks here tonight to help you do that and get your individual questions answered that pertains to your particular property. So we've got Dave, who you met from the city of Missoula. We also have Cassie Trepard over there. She's actually your city floodplain administrator if you live in the city of Missoula. And then we have a couple of folks from Missoula County here. In the back of the room there is Matt Heimel from, he's the county floodplain administrator. And then we have Bailey Minnick and where am I seeing? Tim is in the back too here. So we have a couple of folks from the county. They have name tags on. If you have specific county related questions, you can talk to them afterwards anytime tonight. We do have a number of folks from DNRC, if you guys can raise your hand here, that can help. And then we have some of the engineering folks that did some of the technical work on these studies. So if you're really interested or have questions about how the studies were done, don't ask me as the outreach specialist. They would be a much better person to kind of walk you through that. So we've got Allied Engineering, Morrison, Maryland. You guys can raise your hands over there. So so we're available here tonight to really sit down with you and look at your property specifics and kind of talk through your individual questions. What I'm going to do right now is just take a couple of minutes and cover what these maps are, what they mean, give you a little background about the project, and then the next steps in the process before we then give you time to kind of sit down one-on-one and go through things in more detail if you haven't had a chance to do that already. One thing, you'll also see Granite County on this slide. I wanted to mention this was a pretty large project. It involved parts of both Missoula and Granite counties. And tonight we're just going to focus on the Missoula County portion of this study. My pointer works. Oh, there we go. All right. So tonight we're talking about floodplain maps, and the purpose of floodplain mapping is to help identify those areas at risk of flooding ahead of time before we have flood events, so that we can try to keep people out of harm's way and reduce damage to buildings. This is a collaborative effort. The city of Missoula, Missoula County, the state, and FEMA from the federal government, we all work together to try to identify and reduce flood risks. Floodplain maps today are called flood insurance rate maps. They are official maps that are maintained by FEMA, and they do get periodically updated, which is why we're here tonight. A couple things to note. What goes on to these maps, there is not just any old flood event. What gets put on these maps are those areas that are at risk of flooding when we have what's called a 100-year flood event. And I kind of wish they never would have used that word, because it's kind of a misnomer, because people think, well, if we have a 100-year flood event, we're going to be good for another 99 years. So rather than think of it in years, a better way to think of this is a flood event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So you'll use those terms used interchangeably. So that's why sometimes in other places in the country, you'll hear, oh, they had back-to-back 100-year flood events, because it's a percentage rather than a year thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that in a 100-year or 1% flood event, these maps are not going to be able to show every location that could be flooded perfectly, because they're in a flood event, you are going to have some conditions in some locations, like a culvert that gets blocked or a bunch of trees that go down and cause the water to behave a little differently in spots. But by and large, for the most part, these maps should represent those areas that have a risk of getting wet, getting flooded, when we have a 1% or 100-year flood event. These floodplain maps actually get used for a lot of different purposes. They're used by Missoula County and the city of Missoula for where their local floodplain regulations apply. The county and city have floodplain regulations that apply in the areas shown on the maps. Because they do that and require permits for new building in those areas, federally backed flood insurance is available to anybody in Missoula County or the city of Missoula, because they administer regulations in those areas. The maps are also used for community planning purposes, for planning, for subdivision purposes, for septic permits. If you're in the county, they'll use these maps to look at where the 100-year floodplain is. And they're used by mortgage lenders to determine if a house or building that they're financing has the risk of being flooded. They also get used for emergency management purposes. What roads might be overtopped in a 100-year flood event? What neighborhoods might be blocked off? Are there emergency routes they can start thinking about ahead of time? So they serve a lot of different purposes. And given that, we really recognize they should accurately reflect what's at risk of flooding today. So we recognize that it's important when we have the opportunity to update the maps and get them up to current date. Yeah.
How often are the maps updated?
Okay, question. I'm just going to try to repeat here for these folks so they hear online. How often do the maps get updated? Great question. It's like ideally it would be every 5 or 10 years, but as I'll talk about in a second, it's been quite some time since you've had updated maps on the Clark Fork, the Bitterroot River, and Rock Creek.
Is there something triggering this particular update?
Yes, the county and city have basically everything is really old, which I'll go over in a second, and then it's really time to do that. We work with communities all around the state to update when we have funding available to do that. So, yeah. Good question. Okay, so as kind of leading off from that, it's a good segue here. The city of Missoula and Missoula County have actually had floodplain maps since the 1970s. That map you see in their upper right corner is a picture of part of the city of Missoula's first floodplain map, produced in 1974. They didn't have they used the information they had available at the time to map the area that they determined at the time to be at risk of flooding. It's a little coarser than the maps that we have today, as you can tell. So in the 80s, there was some flood study work done, and revised floodplain maps were produced for Missoula County and the city in the late 80s. And that looks like that lower map there you see in the lower right-hand corner. In 2015, those 1980 maps were converted into digital format. And that's that picture on the bottom left there that you're seeing in color. I want to point out that between 1980s and 2015, there have been a couple of small update areas and revisions to parts of the maps. One notable one, the removal of Milltown Dam certainly changed the river and what would flood there if we had a flood event. So there was a small revision done to just that area. But for the most part, there has been no comprehensive flood study done for the Clark Fork River, the Bitterroot River, or Rock Creek since 1980s. So your 2015, your current floodplain maps here, even though they may say 2015, are really based off of study work and maps produced in the 1980s. Yeah.
Was there something driving that conversion in 2015?
Yeah, was there something driving the conversion in 2015? FEMA works nationally. We work with FEMA on that. Basically, digital maps are a whole lot easier to use than these old paper maps. So there's been a push nationally to get things converted into digital format. So that was what happened. It was a map modernization initiative that has been happening all across the country. And we still have a bunch of counties in the state that still have old black and white paper maps. So we're still working on updating those.
And was that 2015 mapping the whole like Bitterroot, Clark Fork area, or just the part that you're kind of showing?
Oh, good question. It was the whole county was converted in digital format. Yep. Okay. All right, so you asked kind of what's prompting this. A number of years ago, the city and county, because your maps are going on 40 years old, it's 40-year-old data and mapping that produced those, they requested updated, better information. So we started working together to get some grant funds and conduct some updated flood studies for these rivers. So in total, it's about 100 stream miles for the Clark Fork River from county line to county line, the whole portion of the Bitterroot River in Missoula County, and then Rock Creek, the little portion you have in Missoula County, and then also some in Granite County as well there. It's a pretty big undertaking. These flood studies will eventually replace your current maps with new updated information. I know there's some interest in what goes into a flood study. How are they conducted? We do have some handouts here. It's this kind of little pamphlet here, I'll show it here for the folks online, about understanding the flood study process. You can also get this on the project website that I'll go over in a bit if you don't pick one up tonight. So this goes through some of the steps that are used. If you have specific questions about the data and all that stuff, I would highly recommend talking to the engineers who do the work because they can really walk you through that in probably as much detail as you'd like tonight. So lots of data and analysis that go into these. One thing that I want to point out with this is one of the pieces that a lot of people are really curious about and is probably one of the most important parts of it. Largely because it wasn't used in older studies, it wasn't available, is a surveying technology that gets used all across the country and all across Montana, a surveying technology called LIDAR. And what it does, if you've got questions about it, we can certainly dig into those details later, but in a nutshell, it uses light pulses to generate really detailed topography to get what the ground is looking like. This is kind of an example. I just threw this up here so you can kind of see this is, Missoula here, that's Mount Sentinel. You can see the university there. You can see the stadium, the oval thing. It really talks about the detail of sort of what the topography is. And so you can get really good elevation. And topography and elevation is really important for doing flood studies because it really helps get accurate information about where the water is going to go when we have flooding. Okay, I will go ahead and take a question, I guess, if you, go ahead, sorry.
For the LiDAR, maybe it's for them, what time of year was it flowing? Did you have to survey the channel bottom?
Okay, good question. What time of year was the LiDAR flown and did you have to survey the channel bottom? So these are pretty technical questions, but I'll definitely, I mean, you can drill into this a lot, but for everybody, it was flown in 2019. And yes, the LiDAR does not penetrate the water. So you're right. So you have to do surveying in the water to get what's in the channel bottom. So those are done together. Also bridges and other things are added into that too. So it's just one piece of it.
I'll just, we do our best to fly when it's leaf off, so that the LiDAR does actually penetrate through trees as well. So if there were some sort of bugs or something like that, we can still get them.
Yeah. So like, was it during the spring or was it like late summer?
We usually do it during the spring, midsummer. Yeah, like if there's worst case scenario, it'd be like July, but everything's usually April.
We're just talking, for folks online, we're talking about the time of year it gets flown. So, okay.
I just have one question,
Mhm.
and that is what's gonna happen between, this is a draft. So what's gonna happen between now and 2025?
We're gonna talk through that. Yeah, there's lots of review process. So yeah, you're getting ahead, which is great. Okay. All right. So that's just the LiDAR because it's kind of interesting and folks are really curious about sort of that. It's a pretty important piece of that. Okay, so the results of these flood studies that we've been working on for a couple of years are the draft floodplain maps. And we're now at the stage where the draft maps are ready for review. They're not adopted or finalized yet, but we're getting them to you kind of early in the process so you can take an early look at them. Public review of these is a really important part of the process, so we want to make sure we're getting them into your hands early. The maps are not expected to be finalized for a while, probably a couple of years from now. Yeah.
So if you just, can you back up?
You bet.
So I just saw that a 100-year floodplain is a 1% chance, but the 500-year floodplain is a 2%.
It's a 0.2%. Yeah, you're right. Good,
Okay.
good math check there. Yeah, no, it's good. It's less often than, yeah, I need to too. So a 500-year event is less often than a 1%, so it's a 0.2%.
So the flood that was in like Yellowstone, and I think they called that.
Yeah, so the question was about the flood on the Yellowstone River and some of the over in Carbon County or Rock Creek. They're still kind of going through some of those numbers there, but a lot of the stream gauges is what are used to kind of determine that. And it's rough, probably over a 500-year event for a lot of those rivers. So we'll probably have final numbers at some point.
So this is probably an early on question, but what technically defines a flood?
A flood, what technically defines a flood? So it's a river would have to be, the floods that we map here are not like, the fire hydrant flooded or something else. So this would be a flood from a river. In your case, in Missoula County, it's usually snow melt and rainfall. Your flooding season tends to be in that spring, early summertime. When you get enough water coming down those rivers, that some of it starts to spill out of the banks and flood areas. So the 100-year flood, we go through this. That's part of one of the steps is how much water is expected to come down those rivers in a 100-year flood event. So that's part of it. Okay. Okay, so a lot of the information that came from the studies, some of what you're talking about, sort of that hydrology, the water, like how much water, all that information is posted on this project website if you're interested in going and taking a look at that. We also brought some copies of the reports here on the table. You're welcome to take a look at those. And since this is the last of our 3 meetings this week, if you want to take one of them home, you're certainly welcome to do that. But there's a couple ways to get to this website. You got a postcard in the mail, depending on if you lived in the city or the county. So you can use the links there on there to get to this website. or you can just type in that web address there at the top. And it's on some of the handouts that you picked up as well, but www.floodplain.mt.gov/Missoula-Granite, because this was both counties together. Okay. So on that website is a link to a map viewer, how you can see the draft maps. And that's that blue box kind of partway down that page there. And you can use that viewer to look at the draft maps and how they compare to the current floodplains and a bunch of other information. So what I'm going to do is just walk through what you do, what happens when you go through that, whether you do that in person here today at one of the stations afterwards, or if you're doing it at home, kind of walk you through what that looks like and what information you can get out of that. So when you first open the map viewer, you're going to see the draft floodplains. That's what it'll pop up first. You can use that magnifying glass that you see there to type an address in. That's a little search bar. You can type your address in, or you can zoom into the map and move around however you want to get to your particular property. When you're looking at the map, the blue area from end to end, and I don't have a pointer here, but I'll just do it. So the blue kind of from side to side is what is proposed as the draft 100-year floodplain. That area, based on the new study information, that's expected to get wet when we have a 1% or 100-year flood event. So that's the area that has the high risk of flooding. That's the area where the county and city are going to require floodplain permits for any new development. It's also where a lender, if you have a mortgage on your home or your building, and it's in that blue 100-year floodplain, that lender will require you to carry flood insurance if you have a loan with them when the new maps go into effect. The inside that blue area is, thank you, Bailey, is a reddish colored area. That's called the floodway. And that's the floodway portion of the 100-year floodplain. It's within it. But it's where we typically are going to see the deepest and fastest moving water in a big flood event. For that reason, the city and county regulations, and those follow federal standards, no new buildings are allowed in the floodway portion of the floodplain. Another color you're going to see on these maps is a tan color. It's kind of shown in the very bottom there. Sometimes somebody was talking to somebody earlier, and sometimes hard to see the colors with the aerial photo underneath. So we'll certainly help you with that if you have some questions. But the tan areas are representing a more moderate flood risk area. So not as high as that blue and the red areas. So that's areas where you could see some real shallow flooding in a 100-year flood event, or it may not get wet at all until we have that larger flood event, a 500-year flood event, something that's going to happen less often, that 0.2% flood event. Lenders typically don't require flood insurance in this moderate flood risk zone if you've got a mortgage. But I will say, if you're in the county, make sure you talk to one of the county folks here, because just depending on your elevation, the county may require you to if it's shallow enough to get, if it could get wet in a 100-year flood event still, they may require you to go through that permit process. But so just talk through that if you've got that. Okay. Another color you're going to see on this map is yellow, and you don't see it on this particular one. But those are other maps, floodplains in Missoula County that we are not updating as part of this project. So like Rattlesnake Creek, Lolo Creek, Grant Creek, those also have mapped floodplains. And this project is not going to, those are going to just stay. So you'll see those on there. We just didn't want you to think that there's nothing there. Okay, if you zoom in close enough, far enough when you are on that first, when you first open up the map and you zoom in, you're going to start to see these lines appear across that floodplain. And what those are those that are the flood elevations that were determined from the study. So it's how high the water is expected to get in feet above sea level as you move up or downstream on that river. On the map viewer, we have a couple other things that you can do. On the left side, you see some numbers there, and those are different tabs that you can click on. So if you're curious to see, well, what is the current floodplain map show? Where am I in relation to the current floodplain map? You can do that by clicking on tab 2. So this is, I'm just zooming out here, so you're seeing the whole county. But this is using those same colors we talked about. These are your current floodplain maps for Missoula County. Again, they'll have a data of 2015 on them, but based on data from the 1980s. So if you go to tab 3, this is going to be a comparison of those two. So you can go in between 1 and 2 if you want, or you can click on tab 3, and it's going to show you the current overlaid against on top of the draft maps and what's proposed to change just for the 100 years. So if you're looking at the 500 year, that's not going to show up here. But so anywhere you see blue in this map is area that is proposed to just stay as is. It was mapped as 100-year floodplain on your current maps. The new maps, the new study shows it's still at risk of getting flooded. We're proposing that just will stay mapped as mapped floodplain. The green areas are those areas that your current maps show in the 100-year floodplain, but based on our new study information, and in a lot of cases, it's probably based on better topography, that those areas are not at risk of getting flooded from a 100-year flood event. So we're proposing to remove those from the floodplain. The red areas are the opposite of that. So those are not mapped or included in your current map, but based on the new study information, it was determined that those areas actually are at risk of getting flooded if we have a 1% or 100-year flood event. So those areas are proposed to be newly mapped into the 100-year floodplain. Make sense? Okay. Tab 4 is pretty much the same thing, except for it's just looking, it's a comparison, but just of the floodway portion of the floodplain. If you have any questions, we can certainly help you with that at the stations afterwards here. Okay, so in terms of changes, I want to point out one of the areas where you are going to see some changes from the current maps. And this is the Clark Fork River between, kind of between Russell Street and the Orchard Homes area. And the new study, the new Clark Fork flood study and modeling results are showing that during a really big 1% 100-year flood event, some of the floodwaters have the potential to leave the Clark Fork River, here where you're seeing that kind of red arrow, and flow kind of along River Road area towards the west. Initially, those waters are pretty shallow, so it's mapped as a kind of moderate risk area. But as they start to move further west and start mixing with other floodwaters that are also coming out of the Clark Fork there, and overtopping Reserve Street, there could be some flooding risk there that is occurring there. So, and then the floodwaters have a potential to continue moving in a southwesterly direction behind the current Orchard Homes levee before that water kind of rejoins the flow from the Clark Fork there. So we know that some of that area is currently mapped as a more moderate risk. So some of that is going to change based on the new study results. If you're in that area, I know you folks were talking earlier, we're happy to kind of walk through all of that with you and sort of talk about what those changes are. The other thing I wanted to point out is that during past flood events, more recently in like 2011 and 2018, there's been some areas where high groundwater has been an issue in those areas. particularly kind of behind the levee there. And I just want to say this flood study is just looking at surface waters, just flood waters. So it's not combining or looking at groundwater impacts. Okay. So before you leave tonight, just want to make sure that you know where your property or your house is in relation to these draft flood risk areas. When you're looking at those maps, we talked about that. The blue is that proposed 100-year floodplain, the area expected to get wet when you have a 1% 100-year flood event. That's where the county and city are going to require floodplain permits for new building, and where a lender will require you to carry flood insurance when the new maps go into effect to protect their investment as they're loaning you that money. That's one of that requirements that they will follow. If you have or will own property that falls into that 100-year floodplain area, I would encourage you to make sure you take home one of these blue colored sheets, so it's color coded to match the blue on the map, what it means to own property in a 100-year floodplain. If you have property in that red portion of the floodplain, that floodway part, again, that's the area where no new buildings are allowed in those areas. We do have a sheet about what does that mean for you, or for property owners. You can make sure and pick up one of those on your way out. What's the other thing I wanted to say here? So outside, or one thing I didn't, so we have the high risk areas and the moderate risk areas. So anywhere outside of that doesn't have a shaded area is an area considered low risk. Low risk does not mean no risk. And I think this is a really important year for all of us to kind of recognize that. You asked about the flood events and the other parts of the, that were bigger than 100 and 500-year events, and a lot of homes did get flooded and damaged. Because of that, flood insurance is available to anyone, regardless of where you live, regardless of what flood zone you live in, as a way to protect your investment in the case of a flood. And I'll talk about insurance in just a second here. Okay. So on these sheets, this has kind of a lot more detailed information. I'm just going to go over a few of the highlights here. But essentially, if you live in an area that is or will be mapped as 100-year floodplain, it doesn't mean necessarily that you can't build. It just means you need to follow get a permit and follow the regulations so that whatever you're building is safe enough from future flood events and is not going to negatively impact on somebody else. The biggest kind of component of that is that new construction needs to be built so that that first floor is 2 feet above that flood elevation. So you'll be high and dry when you have a flood event. This is for new construction. And then again, no new buildings in that floodway portion. All right, I said I'd talk about flood insurance. If your building is in that high flood risk area, that 100-year floodplain, and you have a mortgage, your lender will require you to carry flood insurance once the new maps go into effect. If your building is in one of the lower risk areas, flood insurance, your bank typically doesn't require flood insurance, but it's still recommended. Both landowners and renters can purchase flood insurance, and homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. So flood insurance is really an important way to protect your investment in the case of a flood.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the FEMA flood insurance. Does that cover both the cleanup after the flood as well as restoration or fixing?
So the question was, does the FEMA flood insurance cover the cleanup after the flood as well as the restoration of the flood? or restoration afterwards. And I am not an insurance expert, but we do have somebody in the back of the room, Shailia, that can help with some of that, but I will try to just do a high level answer. I believe there are, if you have flood insurance and you make that claim, that will cover some of that cleanup costs and then some of the reconstruction. Is that right, Shailia?
The part I would just add to what Tiffany said, as far as the construction and the cleanup, is it's a maximum of $250,000.
Okay, yeah.
So
So there's insurance policies through the National Flood Insurance Program, and those do have a maximum of 250,000 as the cap. So yeah,
and 100,000 for your personal.
like your contents would be $100,000 max. So okay, lots of information about insurance, and we can certainly get you some of that later too. If we can't get some of your questions answered tonight, we're happy to get back to you and get that. So okay, go ahead.
So how many properties in Missoula County are being impacted by this new floodplain?
How many properties in Missoula County are being impacted by this property map, or by this floodplain map update? So I will it was Missoula County and the city of Missoula, and we overlaid the maps with the on cadastral to show the any parcel that had any part of land in the new draft 100 or 500. The city and county sent out postcards to those. So I will let Bailey tell you how many.
The county sent out a little under 1,600 postcards, and that, like Tiffany said, includes both the 105, anybody whose property
touched a little tiny
anything
piece.
that was going. And then I'm not sure Cassie or Dave would know how many the city sent out separately.
Just under 700.
Okay, so 1,100 from the county and 700 from the 1,600.
600.
Okay, 1,600 from the county and 700 from and change from the city. So again, that's anybody that had any portion of property that fell within the 100 or 500 year. So sometimes people have a parcel land and just the corner is in there. Sometimes their house, sometimes not their. So it's really kind of depends. And I guess the other thing to keep in mind, this is about 100 miles of rivers. So it's a large area that's covering the county.
Are there more detailed numbers to follow up on his question about like the number you showed? You know, the blue is everyone's staying the same. The red is new homes or, you know, new affected properties, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering how many are newly affected by the draft.
Yeah, so we do have some of those numbers. I do have it broken down in acreages by that blue and the red and the green, and I have that, so I can be happy to share that with you afterwards. Yeah.
A great way to think of that is not so much who is newly affected as much as who has been identified as high risk, you know, for flooding, higher risk for flooding.
Yeah, I will say one thing.
That's mostly what the maps are trying to say.
Yeah. One thing I will, what I will say is there were definitely, it wasn't all added. We definitely had a lot of acres that are proposed to come out of the floodplain too. You can kind of visually see that when you look at the whole county, the green and the red there, but I do have that broken down in numbers if you're interested in looking at that, but yeah, okay. Okay, almost getting here to the tail end here, so you can get some of your individual questions answered. The other thing I just wanted to mention about flood insurance is that the city and county both participate in a national program that recognizes their local floodplain efforts. And because they do that, people who have flood insurance in Missoula County and the city of Missoula automatically receive a discount on flood insurance policies because of the work that the city and county do. If you compare that to other counties or other parts of the country. So, yep.
Is that, because you know how you can buy flood insurance on the private market?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, do they also take?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, what about buying flood insurance on the private market? Does that discount come into play there? I do not believe it does. I think these would only be policies that are part of the National Flood Insurance Program. So, yep. Because we don't have a lot of say over what a private company would do. So, yeah. Okay. All right. So, the question came up sort of where are we at in this process and sort of what happens next. This timeline is up on that project website, so you can go and take a look at this later if you want to. But we're kind of in the middle of this process where we have the draft data available for review. We're still a few years out from these maps replacing your current maps. And the reason is they do go through a lengthy public review process. That public review process will include a formal comment and appeal period that FEMA actually holds, and that'll be sometime in 2023. And that's a time for if people have more data or if they wanted to submit more engineering information to if they think the maps are incorrect in a certain location, or they think something should be corrected, that's the time to sort of provide that technical information to comment and to appeal the maps at that point. But so that will be available. We probably will have some more public meetings in advance of that, and we will definitely post kind of where we're at in this process on the project website. You can always also call the city or the county, and they can give you kind of a status update of where things are at. In the meantime, we really encourage you to take a look at these maps, and if you see things that errors or things that just don't look right, even though we're not in that official comment period, we would like to know that. So you can provide that feedback to DNRC folks here or to the city and county directly, so we can take another look at something if we need to. So your feedback is really an important part of these maps, and we really want to welcome your feedback. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is that because this came up at some of the other meetings. So with the maps, sometimes they may not show, they're not able to show really fine details. So sometimes somebody may have a house, I'm going to give this example, that it may be on a little piece of higher ground, like a little knoll or something. And the maps are not just able to show that fine level of detail. So there is a process available. It doesn't have to be, it's available anytime to submit some of that information to FEMA and get a more detailed determination on your particular house. So if you have that question or need that, we'd be happy to talk through that with you.
The homeowner expected to take the cost to get this map corrected, or will the
Well,
county pick it up?
yeah, so that's not really a correction to the map. It's just sort of showing some more detail, so they won't. Oh, the correction if something is inaccurate with like the study and there's a big change to a certain area. Okay, you're not just talking about a little house. Yeah, so in order to sort of say something is wrong and you have to provide some technical information. So that I don't know. I guess it would just depend on sort of how far that goes, how that plays out, but we'll have to see. Usually in order to show something is in error, you have to at least have some ability to, I don't know, provide some of that technical information, whether that's survey data or having an engineer kind of redo some of the modeling or the engineering work. Does that make sense? I can talk to you about that more later. Okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, so, okay. Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I just have one general question.
Sure.
What does this do to our property value? Because I see things from 2% to 15%, property value diminishes. I know that's probably a question that a lot of folks have is, or what does this do to property values? I wish I had an answer, a number I could give you. So it's really property specific, sort of what the situation is. Same with like the cost of insurance is also really specific to people's houses. Much like when you're buying car insurance, they put a lot of factors into what that costs. So it's really hard for me to kind of to say. I guess I would, realtors are probably a good people that have a handle on sort of what that, you know, the market for that, so. Okay, yeah.
Question, as these new flood maps are put into, or implemented and such, very possible that you're going to see a piece of property change in appraised value. That is, if previously it was buildable and now it becomes unbuildable, that there's a real change in appraisals there, which in turn should affect the taxation on the property. Is and I think our Department of Revenue is the one that's in charge of the appraisals throughout the state, aren't they? I believe they are. Is the Department of Revenue automatically taking into account these changes? Or is this going to be a burden upon the homeowners to go in and negotiate that with the Department of Revenue? Because if that's a burden on the individuals, I can guess that it's going to be pricey to get the good surveyors to come out and survey all of those new changes.
Yeah.
The homeowner's or the owner of the property is going to end up paying a whole bunch of money.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I'm just to repeat for online, it was a question about sort of, does the Department of Revenue kind of automatically reassess based on and adjust an appraised value based on changes in the floodplain situation? I don't have a great handle on that. I don't know if other folks do, but we could maybe get an answer back to you on that, Shailia.
I would just add on that, you know, the focus of the mapping update, we don't really look at the values or the effective values. You know, we're looking at the risk and the likelihood of something happening to the home. But in answer to your Department of Revenue question, they do, and double check with the county, but it is state now, a statewide regulation that they go around every 2 years and reevaluate and reappraise the properties in the state. So they might pick that up if there's a change in the value to your home. You can always challenge that. You know, they have little things that you can challenge that value. Also, all those folks down in Carbon County, Stillwater County, Red Lodge County, were flooded this past year and now have homes that fell into the river or are substantially damaged. They can go to their Department of Revenue, there's forms, and they can fill that out and say the value of my property has changed and therefore my taxation should change too. So that's what we're trying to avoid, hopefully, for you guys in the future, should something.
Good questions. All right. So I think right now, what I'm going to do is just wrap it up for those who are kind of joining us online. And for those who are here in person, and we know every situation is different, and you probably have questions that are really specific to your particular property or your house. So we do have a lot of folks around the room here to help you look at that. Again, if we can't answer those questions, make sure you leave your name and number for us and we will get back to you and get your questions answered. So, all right. Thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it and have a good evening.
Hey, Tiffany.
Thanks.
Tiffany. Can you
hang on, let
can
me
you
just
shut? Oh, okay. Never mind. Hi, Katrina and Andrew. I am here to answer any questions you may have, or if you wanted to look at your property.
Also, if you feel more comfortable putting your questions in a chat, we can also answer those from here.
I'd love if you could answer the question, if there are any changes to our property, I'd be happy to give you our address.